South Florida's water resources are faced with complex and challenging pollution problems. These existing threats are compounded by future conditions: higher seas, hotter temperatures, and more population growth. But the future of our region's water resources remains uncharted. Both challenges and opportunities lie ahead. As we move forward into the future, we, as individuals, are tasked with creating a cleaner, safer, more equitable, and more resilient watershed in South Florida. For years, scientists have warned that Biscayne Bay has been approaching a precarious tipping point. A 2019 study revealed that Biscayne Bay is facing a regime change, running the risk of transitioning from a seagrass-dominated ecosystem to an algae-dominated ecosystem. The bay has lost at least 20 square miles of seagrass, which you can even see from satellite images. In some areas, 80 to 90% of seagrass has utterly disappeared. Algae blooms, which clog our waterways, turn the water green, smell rancid, and can cause harm to fish, wildlife, and people. The cause? Nutrient pollution. Biscayne Bay is exquisitely sensitive to nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus. In some cases, nutrients are naturally occurring, but in excess, they can be harmful. Excess nutrients create prime conditions for algae growth, which stifles other marine life, chokes out the available oxygen in the water column, and makes the bay more vulnerable to higher temperatures. Despite the years of warning signs and the bay's cries for help, our South Florida community watched helplessly in the summer of 2020 as Biscayne Bay experienced a localized collapse, a fish kill in the northern basin. More than 40 marine species were impacted. Seahorses, octopus, snook, barracuda, stingrays, pufferfish, eels, lobster, and more rolled up dead and dying on the shores of Biscayne Bay. While many stood idly by, shocked by the devastating demonstration of decline, Miami Waterkeeper's team quickly activated, coordinating daily calls with scientists to guide research inquiries, mobilizing government agencies to institute rapid response and life-saving aeration efforts for the bay, assembling volunteers to collect decaying marine life from the shores, organizing community partners to demand political action. Miami Waterkeeper was the tip of the spear. Chronic and acute pollution inputs are likely the ultimate driver of this fish kill event. Sources like dirty stormwater, contaminated septic effluent, raw sewage, and nutrient-rich fertilizer must be curtailed to avoid future events and to prevent Biscayne Bay from becoming a dead zone incapable of supporting life. The former mayor of South Miami and FIU scientist, Dr. Phil Stoddard, shares his perspective on the issue of septic tank failure as part of the pollution puzzle and the pressing need to curb nutrient pollution.
So folks around Greater Miami love Biscayne Bay. It's part of why we're here. Is we like going out to the beach, we like using the bay, we like seeing the bay, we like seeing the wildlife that lives in the bay. It's part of our ethos, it's part of our reason for being here, it's part of the reason for having a city here. It's a big part of that reason. And so the bay is precious to us. And so we are concerned about anything that threatens the health of the bay. And when I say we, I mean almost everybody in Dade County cares deeply about this. So when we start discovering that our way of life is harming the bay, we're pretty concerned, and we start saying, well, what do we have to do? What do we have to change? You know, what can I do as a homeowner to not contribute to destroying Biscayne Bay that I love? One of the things we've learned is that our water and sewer infrastructure is crumbling. It's crumbling underground, so we don't even see it. It's all over Miami-Dade County that these old sewer pipes are giving out. They're just crumbling underneath us. And we know this also from all the sewer pipe breaks. There are constantly breaks. And, you know, thousands and even millions of gallons of sewage are getting out into the bay. This doesn't do the bay any favors, to put it mildly. The other insidious problem, and this is one that affects South Miami directly, is the problem of septic tanks. I've got a septic tank in my front yard. That was there when the house was, when I purchased the house. And we have a canal about a block and a half away. And the holes in the rock, in the limestone rock underneath us are like pinky-sized. These were caused by prehistoric ghost shrimp who still live in Biscayne Bay, and they make little tunnels in the sediments, and those tunnels get fossilized, and you get beautiful little holes through them. Well, the problem is any water in my yard rockets through these holes. So when I flush my toilet, I put, among other things, nitrogen and phosphorus into my septic tank, and I'd love to be able to do something different. I'd love to get that nitrogen and phosphorus to a plant that could handle it and not put it back into our ecosystem. When the water table rises, your septic tank stops working. Essentially, the nitrogen stops gassing off and it all goes into the water and all goes into the bay. And that's what's been happening. So the older houses have already had their septic tanks stop functioning and they're polluting like crazy. And so you might say, well, that's terrible. What can I do about that? And the answer is you got to apply political pressure at the county level, the state level, and the federal level, because nobody is really doing anything about it. I mean, they studied the issue. They said, oh my God, we got a lot of septic tanks. It's expensive to fix. End of story? That should be the beginning of the story. They should be working like crazy to bring in the money to fix this. And they're not.
Relying on a groundswell of community support and forward-thinking political bodies, Miami Waterkeeper has worked to find innovative legislative solutions to our complex pollution puzzle in the legislative arena. To date, 5 municipalities, including the city of Miami, have passed a fertilizer ordinance developed by Miami Waterkeeper aimed at curtailing nutrient pollution and protecting water quality. But fertilizer is just one input to a seemingly insurmountable problem. We must continue to build coalitions, bridge communication, generate collective action, and drive the narrative of clean water for our community. Our next guest is a change maker and a beacon of hope for this imperative call to action. Zelalem Adefris is the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Catalyst Miami, where she drives strategic change in our community through civic engagement at all levels of our local government.
Since I've been here over the past 4 years, I've seen a huge increase in public participation on climate action and on sustainability. And that public participation has directly resulted in huge investments on this issue. So I think we need even more of that. We need more collective policy making, more bold leadership, and more diverse voices coming together to tackle the issue from all sides. So I think in order for Miami to become more resilient and sustainable, we need to continue to have a lot of public engagement. Government needs to make sure that in this really challenging problem that they can't solve it alone. I think we need the expertise and genius of our residents who have a huge range of experience to be able to contribute.
The more you know, the more you'll care. This philosophy is at the core of Miami Waterkeeper's mission to educate our community about the value, both intrinsic and extrinsic, of our precious water resources. That's because the health of our shared watershed depends largely on community buy-in. Fostering a sense of shared ownership in our water resources is critical to cultivating collective action for protection of these resources. We are the voice of South Florida's water, and through education and conversation, we can effectuate change for the better, together. Climate activist and artist Xavier Cortada showcases how dialogue through art can catalyze action for water resources.
My name is Adam Roberti. I'm the director of Cortada Projects. So I work with artist Xavier Cortada in developing and implementing his socially engaged eco-art practice in Miami-Dade County and across the state and the country. Xavier has lived his whole life in Miami. Miami is home. I've lived my whole life in South Florida. This is home. And the culture here is something that is found nowhere else in the world. And what everybody who lives here wants is for it to be sustainable, for it to be sustained through time, for it not to get washed away, for it not to go underwater. So we live in a time right now where the scientists could not be more clear about what is happening in the world, yet we have a community that is not fully understanding the science. And there's many reasons for that, but what we see is that art can be the glue, if you will, between the science and the community, because we are facing issues like global climate change, like sea level rise, which requires massive action. It requires change that is unprecedented. And we're not going to get that kind of change without everybody on board. And so then the question really becomes, well, how do you foster that community engagement? I work with Xavier to create these art projects, and the most recent one of his is Plant. And it's about planning and planting for the future of Miami-Dade County. And we do that with mangrove propagules. So a lot of people know about mangrove forests. They know how important they are as a defense mechanism, right? Keeping our communities safe from storm surge and flooding. They understand how important they are for carbon sequestration. But a lot of people don't realize that they are salt tolerant, meaning they're not salt loving. They can live in your yard, not necessarily inundated in water, and they can live with fresh water. So what we're having people do is actually plant a mangrove propagule in their front yard next to a sign that has their elevation on it. And what that does is that catalyzes conversation, because if you can imagine a friend or a family member stopping by, sees this sign with a 4 on it and a little plant, and they're going to ask you, what is that doing there? What is that about? What does that number mean? And now you have the opportunity to talk to them about why you planted that particular plant there, what that sign is doing there, what your elevation is, and why we all need to be talking about sea level rise, about the future of our community. Because if we're not talking about it, our leadership has no incentive to handle it, and we're going to be dead in the water, no pun intended. A longitudinal installation is a project about empathy and proximity, bringing people together from all around the world. Diatom Court honors the tiny little algae, diatoms, that provide a third of the oxygen that we breathe. We have the power, art, to enact major change if it's used to its fullest potential. I think that art can be used to create leaders. And what we need at this moment are leaders to step up, to be compassionate, to be empathetic, but to understand the science and to guide us in a way that recognizes and takes into account what the scientists are telling us.
As we look to the future, we consider the next generation and the challenges they'll face. The path ahead is filled with threats to our watershed, both known and unknown. But there's a reason we say hope springs eternal. The next generation gives us faith that our water resources will not only be protected, but cherished. And while Miami Waterkeeper works to prepare this next generation of environmental leaders, we recognize we cannot delay the important work that lies ahead. So, we're inviting you. Consider this your formal invitation to the conversation. We are inviting you to be part of the solution. We're inviting you to get involved, to volunteer, to be a voice for our waters. We are inviting you to join us in saving our watershed. A small action, like water dropping into the ocean, can have a ripple effect. Together, we can be the waves of change.